Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. Tonight's guest is the congressman from New York's 13th Congressional District, which includes Marble Hill and the neighborhoods in the Northwest Bronx, and also Harlem, Hamilton Heights, Washington Heights, Inwood in Manhattan. We're going to talk with him about a range of international, national, and local issues. So let's get right to it. It's our pleasure to welcome back to Bronx Talk Representative Adriano Espaillat.
Thank you,
I
Gary.
know you worked hard to get here.
Thank you.
And you made it.
Finally here.
And we're thrilled that you're
It's
here.
a pleasure to be back.
Let's just roll our sleeves up and start right here. The Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th killed 1,200, took hundreds of hostages, many of whom, as you well know, are not free, shocked and sickened the democratic world. What do you make of Israel's response? Now it has displaced more than 80% of the Gaza population, destroyed more than 60% of the buildings in Gaza, turning it into what the Associated Press called an uninhabitable moonscape. I know you're a big supporter of Israel, and you've been. Where are we at, and how do you view what has gone on?
Well, obviously, the world is concerned about the status of the Palestinian people and civilians that got caught in this horrible situation and continue to experience it every day, particularly children and women. But I believe that the talk begins with how do we get our hostages back, right? There's still 115 hostages. 8 of them are American citizens. We forgot about that. We still have Americans that are being held hostage. We're hearing the details of some of the hostages that have been released, and it's very gruesome, right? Particularly women, what has occurred to women. The level of rape and other horrible treatment that has been perpetrated against women is really unimaginable.
Yeah.
So we begin with that discussion because they were the first victims, and they were held hostage, and seniors were killed, and women were raped, and children were abducted. And so now we begin with that discussion. How do we get to the ceasefire? By first releasing the hostages, right, that they have. And unfortunately, Hamas has refused even the conversation about a potential ceasefire just recently.
So recently, well, actually in the past, when the few hostages were released, that was, well, because if you do a ceasefire, we'll start releasing. Do you think if there was a ceasefire now, which Israel has started to pull back, do you think that will begin to start the process?
There's a window of opportunities every time you speak about releasing hostages. There's a window of opportunities to establish a road back to some level of normality. Now, obviously, Hamas is a force, a terrorist force that governs Gaza, and their intent is not to have peace and not to have stability there. They don't really care for civilians. In fact, they don't let them in the tunnels. They protect themselves in the tunnels, but not civilians. And so there has to be a two-state solution. I'm an advocate of it. We have to hold firm on that possibility. And that begins with a talk about releasing hostages that leads to a ceasefire, then to a greater discussion where the entire world community should be a part of what role will Gaza take after this horrible conflict.
With Netanyahu inflaming the Arab world, no question about it, with the way that they've leveled, as I mentioned, 60% of Gaza, 80% of the residents of Gaza are now, they're migrants, if you will. There's talk now, there were a couple of Israeli ministers who talked about resettling them, which would be, in essence, a war crime. Does that make it more difficult to get to a two-state solution? Because your office and Congressman Torres' office were vandalized. Does it make it tougher to have a peaceful dialogue with that conditions going on?
I think any radical point of view, whether on the right, led by Netanyahu, or a very radical point of view presented by Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, is not constructive to a conversation that will lead, first and foremost, to a two-state solution. And then, of course, a democratic government that really will be responsible and care for the Palestinian people and their well-being, which has not been the case under Hamas. They put them at peril, and I don't think that's their best interest. So I think that, yes, these radical voices, both on the right and on the other sides represented by Hamas, don't contribute to a solution to this impasse. And I think that the two-state solution should never be abandoned. I think that's the key to a level of peace and a peace that will last for towards the future. That's the way to go, and the world community should engage in a discussion.
Were you frustrated seeing that American funds were being put toward Israel, and at some point did you say to yourself, maybe we can force Israel in a more peaceful or more logical direction that wouldn't inflame the world if we didn't keep funding?
Well, the president has been very strong in advocating for Israel to conduct its activities in a different way. But I tell you, had Israel not counted on the Iron Dome, not much left would have been there. Not much of Israel would have been left to speak about. So, I tend to be a little bit careful of telling the Ukrainians how to use military help, because they're on the ground every day and they're facing attacks. And we see how now they are facing the predicament as they're running out of money, that they're going to have to decide which city to defend and which not to defend. So I think for people like ourselves to place our thoughts in a scenario such as the one playing out in Israel and in Gaza and in the Ukraine, it's often misguided because we don't know the details. Now, President Biden has been very strong in saying that they should rely on different tactics, and I support the president's position.
What about humanitarian aid? And could Israel, now I'm not even saying from a military point of view, pull back, that's which you've already articulated your point of view on that decision, but if Israel and the United States were, and Israel of course has to agree to it, to provide humanitarian aid, find ways that peaceful Gazans who are now in terrible straits, provide medical help, provide food, et cetera, do you think that would ease the world objection to what they see in Gaza right now?
Well, I tell you, Gary, there's help in the package that we're discussing in Congress right now. I fought for humanitarian aid to be included in that package.
So you would support that?
I would support, of course. It's the humane thing to do. I mean, they need help. Civilians there that had nothing to do with the horrible attack need some level of help. And there is humanitarian aid in the package being discussed in Washington now.
Israel would let that happen?
Well, they have not objected to the humanitarian aid component of that bill.
As long as we pay for it.
Well, I think that everybody should chip in, but to rebuild Gaza eventually. But right now, the conversation begins, I believe, with the release of the hostages.
We'll see. I know that's what you're pushing for. Everyone we've interviewed here, even local religious leaders from both sides, agree on the two-state solution. I mean, it's the only way I think that we'll finally.
But
get to some stability.
for a long time I have believed in this two-state solutions, and unfortunately the attack led by Hamas put everything on hold. It put the Abraham Accords on hold. In fact, they may have very well been intended to derail any future peace treaties with other countries or the Arab countries. And we all are quite aware that Iran is fully behind this. And Iran is a country that disrespects women, that don't allow LGBT communities to have their rights. Iran is a country where they encourage mobs to chant "Death to America."
Do you have a sense of what happened there? 100 people were killed just the other day, and of course it led to people yelling "Death to Israel," "Death to America." We still don't know who set off that bomb.
We have no verifiable information on where it came from. Certainly, the United States have said no, and Israel has said no, and the Ayatollahs are saying that it was Israel, and some folks may believe that it might very well have been the
Who
Ayatollahs.
knows? How important is it? You mentioned Ukraine. How important is it for Ukraine to beat back the Russian invasion?
It's very important. I mean,
And it's important to our security and to
our
the world's
security, our economy, the world's economy, Europe, really NATO, Europe, the European Union. It's very much in question if this occurs and Putin is able to take over Ukraine. What happens to other countries like Poland, other border countries that have a long-standing dispute because of their form of governments with Russia? So I think this is much broader than just the conflict between the Ukraine and Russia. It has continent implications.
Of course, the funding has been held up, and I know that yesterday Florida Senator Rick Scott said that he would vote to support funding for Ukraine, but he wanted to I'm working on this. He wanted to tie it to the number of people who are not allowed to cross the southern border. Like he somehow managed to equate those two as a give back. I don't even know what to make of that. Maybe it brings up the whole notion of Democrats and Republicans in Congress now. How do you view a statement?
Well, this
like
is
that?
Republican double talk, right? McCarthy goes into the White House. They shake hands. They have a deal on the budget. He comes back, and they begin to apply further cuts to vital programs like food stamps, like Head Start, daycare centers, things that are
all because of the southern border.
No, well, they reneged on their word, on their handshake with President Biden, and now, of course, they claim to be very strong for a free world. And as we see a conflict, a military conflict between the Ukrainians and Russia, they backpedal, and they want to condition the help to the Ukraine on the immigration issue at the border. But they want it to be punitive and punitive only. They don't talk about funding for the cities that are actually receiving the bulk of the migrants that are crossing the border.
New York has
New York and Chicago and Houston and other cities. They don't talk about work permits, which are a viable solution for migrants coming in that want to work. They don't talk about that. They don't talk about dreamers.
Mayor Adams has been very critical of the president directly, saying the president has not helped New York out. I think it's pretty generally understood. Does that frustrate you as a New York congressman?
I fight it every day to make sure that we get additional funding for New York City. Hopefully, this crossroad of the debate about Ukraine, Israel, and immigration will yield additional funding so that no cuts could be applied to vital services in New York City. I'm an immigrant myself.
I'm
an immigrant myself, sure. and of course, this is a difficult issue, and the fact that we have not been able to do comprehensive immigration reform leads us to what we are right now. But I'm a strong supporter of Dreamers. These are young people that are here. Some of them since they were months old. They are nurses, they are business owners, homeowners, they are police officers, they're lawyers. You know, these are Americans by any other word, right? But that green card. And so we should allow them in. They're contributing to the economy. I'm supportive of them. I'm supportive of the work permit. I think once you give someone the ability to work, it unshackles them.
And so what's stopping that from happening? I mean, the criticism has been of the president.
The president did extend TPS, which accelerates work permits for Venezuelans, which are a good chunk of the migrants. And that should help out. But we should be able to give others the ability to get a work permit. The economy needs it. They have the hunger, the innovativeness. In fact, Gary, I think that's precisely what we need right now to bounce back finally from the COVID-19 pandemic. That's exactly what we need right now. that hunger, that drive, that innovativeness. A mom that walked 2,000 miles with her 2 or 3 children.
She wants to be an American.
Not only that, she would never be late to work. She's not going to miss work because she has the sniffles.
But has President Biden dropped the ball on the border?
I think President Biden has done the best he could, a great job. I think he's addressing it. You know, we need to do comprehensive immigration reform. Unfortunately, you need 60 votes in the Senate to do that. And the other side of the aisle has consistently, unequivocally blocked that. So, you know, when people say, well, Democrats control the Senate and the House, how come you don't pass it? Because we need 60 votes in the Senate.
Right.
And they refuse to move.
And one last question about this, and then I want to talk about our home borough of the Bronx. In 2019, President Trump cut hundreds of millions of dollars in aid to El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, because he said many of their citizens sought asylum at our borders. As I understood that original funding, that was to prevent them from wanting to come to America because it provided some sustenance and other things that they need. Do you see that in a way as what has fueled
that has contributed to it?
It's contributed.
In fact, whenever this administration has put in place an option or an option for folks to access legal entry to the United States, you've seen a reduction. And of course, the root causes of migration in these countries are violence. You know, when a 13-year-old is being recruited by a violent gang and a mom says, I'm not going to lose him, I'm taking him with me. A drought, in a year drought that creates a food security problem, that forces a family to migrate. Environmental issues, political violence, you know,
domestic violence. I mean, we can go on and on.
Yes, correct.
And those funds and even more funding might prevent more.
Absolutely. We have turned our heads on the hemisphere, and now it's showing up in our border. We have for far too long abdicated our leadership role in the Americas, and the Americas have a crisis of democracies, not philosophically, not from the left or from the right, but for governments that have not produced for their people and they're forced to leave.
Some basic sustenance. Let's talk about the Bronx. In August, you came out in support of the Together for Kingsbridge plan, the vision plan through the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development. You provided $200 million of funding, calling development at the Armory the most transformative economic project that the Bronx has ever seen. What's your dream? What's your vision?
Okay.
What is Congressman Espaillat's vision?
First,
plan?
let me say that the Armory, the Kingsbridge Armory, has a bad rap, right? Because of what's happened in the past, right? Failed dreams and opportunities. I think that's about to change, Gary. There's $200 million at the table right now. The RFP process will end January 18th. We just had the Columbia University School of Architecture bring forward 12 different visions from their students that will be displayed this coming week at the Armory for potential developers to see what young minds that are now in Columbia's architectural school think should be done with the building. EDC has invested a lot of capital on it, political capital, and they made it a priority. I think the Armory is an international project. I don't even think is a city project. It's an international one because this is the zip code right here. You know, we put our first testing site in the parking lot right across the studio because of the numbers that we were seeing during the pandemic. And this zip code had the worst numbers in the city. And to tell the rest of the world that where we had the worst numbers during the pandemic, now we have a project that has yielded 2,000 or 3,000 jobs. I think it's an international story.
Are you concerned that EDC, you know, like has happened so many times in the Bronx, that like they make we make a plan, the people of the Bronx make a plan, and all of a sudden the city decides what it wants to do? Are you comfortable that EDC is going to be listening to what?
I think that they have been listening. They continue to listen. There will be a transparent process to select the winner. And I hope whoever wins will primarily provide prevailing wage or good paying jobs to people that live in the Bronx. That's what they want. That's how we're going to transform this neighborhood. That's how people are going to be able to go and shop in local stores, go to the Kingsbridge Diner that's been there for over 60
Well,
years, and be able to lift our community where it should be.
So you mentioned that diner, of course, in the corner of Jerome and Kingsbridge. Now, the landlord, I'm assuming you know about this, the landlord is talking about selling off all those properties in anticipation. I mean, this is the definition of gentrification, selling off those properties. Can that be prevented?
We're working with EDC to ensure that measures are taken to prevent gentrification. And I'm sure that those businesses there will be included in whatever agreement is made with the city and whoever the developer may be. But first and foremost, I believe it provides a great opportunity for the Bronx. It is not just a city or state project. I think that people from all over the world are going to be looking at the Bronx and say, that's a zip code with the worst numbers during the pandemic. Look at what they're doing right now.
Let's bring up something else that happened, and you took a great interest in it. That was the Billingsley Terrace collapse of a facade of a building in Burnside. You introduced some legislation in response to it. I mean, I could quote what it is, but why don't you explain?
The Landlord Accountability Act is one that provides for landlords that access a low-income tax credit to be able to show the stability, the structural stability of a building before they access this benefit, this subsidy. I think it's important that people that get subsidies from government, whether federal, state, or city, they should be able to, at their very least, guarantee that the building is in good standing. You know, Section 8 inspects an apartment, and if they find the apartment not to be in good standing, they will not continue to pay that subsidy to the landlord. They'll ask the family to move out of the apartment, in fact. And so there's
but
no
then
reason.
The landlord doesn't. We still have an apartment that's out of.
That's the problem, because some landlords allow the
compliance.
apartments to deteriorate so they can push families out. But the building certainly has to be in good standing before they access an important subsidy such as a low-income tax.
Do you and Congressman Torres anticipate this being taken up in the coming year?
Yes, and of course he has his component of his bill, so it's a package. Both of us are very much concerned of the number of fires and building collapse in the borough of the Bronx. It shows that the housing stock is in deteriorating condition, and the owners must do better.
And do you have a sense of what happened there? I mean, the city suspended an engineer and said that I can't even imagine that the structural part of the building was really just a facade. That doesn't. By the way, we should mention nobody got hurt and nobody was killed, which of course is the best part of that.
Well, we've asked the city to conduct a full and transparent investigation to get to the bottom of what happened there. I'm sure that it will include matters with the inspector as well.
Let's just talk a little bit of politics before we have to end. Right now, polls are showing that the upcoming presidential election, if it is between Biden and Trump, essentially too close to call. What turns the tide? Are you concerned at all?
Well, look, President Biden has done a tremendous job, I think. Often people forget, where we were during the pandemic, and he was there for us with an increase of food stamp. He was there for us with the PPP loans for small businesses. He was there for us with the stimulus checks. He was there with us for unemployment benefits. At one point, someone in New York State was getting over $1,000 a week for unemployment, $600 from the federal government, $500 from the state while they were at home. We forget very often how they came through for the hospitals and the clinics in the neighborhood, testing sites, vaccines. We forget all these things. He really shepherded us through the most critical crisis of our lifetimes. And people forget, because in politics often is, what have you done for me lately? I think people will remember as we begin to focus on who the candidates are, particularly when you have an option of someone that's been indicted multiple times is carrying a load of negative baggage with them, I think the American people will make the wise choice.
Just before we run out of time, other initiatives for you when you go back into Albany. I said Albany. When you go back, you've been there.
That was a long time ago.
That's right. When you go back to Washington D.C. and you say, "Well, what's my plan for 2024?"
I have three major projects.
All right,
that
we're going to chart them down and bring you back at the end of the year and see.
Second Avenue subway, which is connected to the Bronx because it's connected to Metro North. And $7 billion that have already been approved by Department of Transportation. The cities or MTA is issuing already some contracts. That will connect Harlem and East Harlem to the rest of the world. We have
I'm counting here. Go ahead.
Pete Buttigieg was there to announce it not too long ago. A Dominican American Cultural Center in Washington Heights. That community needs to have a venue where they could showcase what they have contributed to the city of New York and the country. And finally, your very own Kingsbridge Armory.
All right. Listen, Congressman, thank you so much. I know people don't know what we go through to make sure that he gets here, but he got here. And
thank you so much. I really enjoy the show, as I always do, and thank you for having me.
Yes. The redistricting will maybe change things too. That'll be an interesting.
Let's see what happens. Maybe I'll pick up Yankee Stadium this time.
Oh, there you go. Listen, we want to thank certainly the congressman and the people on his staff to help him get here. We want to thank our producer is Rebecca Hemick, our director Will Guzman, and we have a cast of thousands around us in the studio. And of course, to you, the people of the Bronx, you're the best. Next week, he's going to like this. We're going to talk higher education in the Bronx. We'll have a representative from Lehman College and the brand new Mount St. Vincent University. So we'll do that next week. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Stay there, Uncle.